Room 412, 3:47 in the morning. The monitors were beeping slower now, irregular. The old woman in the bed was dying. She had maybe an hour left, maybe less. Her chart said her name was Margaret Chen, 83 years old, no family, no visitors in the 6 weeks she'd been here, no emergency contacts listed, no one to call. She would die alone. Except she wouldn't, because standing in the doorway was a man in blue scrubs, 46 years old, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes, tired eyes. His name was David Torres, and for the past 12 years, he'd made a promise that started in a desert halfway around the world, a promise that had led him to this moment, this room, this woman he'd never met before tonight. He walked to her bedside, pulled up a chair, and took her hand. "Hello, Margaret," he said softly. My name is David, and I'm going to stay with you. You're not alone, I promise. You're not alone." Margaret's eyes flickered open, confused, cloudy, scared. "Who?" she whispered. "I'm a nurse here, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here, for as long as you need me." Before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you about the 1,000 lives David Torres has held in his hands as they slipped away, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story about death. It's a story about what it means to be human, what it means to witness, what it means to care, when caring breaks your heart over and over again. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because this story is going to touch every corner of the world, and I want to see how far compassion can travel. Now let me take you back. I'm back to where this promise was born, back to Iraq, back to the moment that changed David Torres forever. David Torres joined the Marines at 18. It was 1996. The world was peaceful, relatively speaking. He figured he'd serve 4 years, use the GI Bill for college, and move on with his life. He had no idea that 5 years later, everything would change. September 11th, 2001. David was 23, a corporal, combat engineer. Within months, he was deployed to Afghanistan, then Iraq, then back to Afghanistan. He saw combat, saw death, saw things that would wake him up screaming for the next 20 years. But the moment that changed him, the moment that set him on this path, happened in Ramadi. 2004. David's unit was clearing a building. Reports of insurgent activity. They breached the door. Yes, went room by room. In the third room, they found him, an Iraqi man, mid-40s, bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. Not from David's unit. Someone else had shot him. Maybe earlier that day. Maybe the day before. He was enemy. Probably. They found an AK-47 near his body. But David didn't see an enemy. He saw a man, dying, scared, alone. David was trained as a combat lifesaver. Basic medical training. Enough to stabilize casualties until a medic arrived. He knelt beside the man, started assessing his wounds. It was bad, really bad. The man had maybe minutes left. "Doc," David yelled, "I need a corpsman, now!" His sergeant grabbed his shoulder. "Torres, leave him. He's enemy combatant. We don't have time. He's dying. That's not our problem. Let's move." David looked at the man's face. He was conscious, eyes wide, terrified. And he was speaking in Arabic. David didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. "Please, help me. I don't want to die." David made a decision. "I'm staying." "Torres, that's an order. We move now." "Then write me up, but I'm not leaving him." His sergeant stared at him, then nodded. 5 minutes. That's all you get." The unit moved on. David stayed. He couldn't save the man. The wounds were too severe. No amount of training could fix this. So David did the only thing he could do. He took the man's hand. The man looked at him. Enemy and enemy, American and Iraqi. But in that moment, just two human beings, one dying, one witnessing. David didn't speak Arabic. The man didn't speak English, but David spoke anyway. "Hey, I'm here. You're not alone. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." The man squeezed his hand. David squeezed back. They stayed like that for 4 minutes. The man's breathing got shallower. His grip got weaker, then stopped. David closed the man's eyes, said a prayer. He didn't know what religion the man was, so he prayed in his own tradition and hoped God would understand. When David walked out of that building, he was different. Something had shifted inside him. He'd held a man's hand while he died, an enemy, and it had felt like the most important thing he'd ever done. David did 3 more deployments, came home in 2008. He was 30, medically retired, not for physical injuries, for PTSD. He couldn't sleep, couldn't be around crowds, couldn't handle loud noises. The VA gave him medication, therapy. It helped, some. But David was lost. He'd been a Marine for 12 years. It was his identity, his purpose. Without it, he didn't know who he was. He tried different jobs, construction, security, retail. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt meaningful. He'd spent 12 years in service, serving his country, serving his brothers. Now he was just existing. His therapist at the VA, a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, noticed. "David, what did you love most about being a Marine?" she asked during one session. David thought about it. The mission. Knowing that what I did mattered, that I was helping people. What about the Marines specifically? What moments stick with you? David's mind went immediately to that room in Ramadi, to the dying man, to holding his hand. "There was this guy," David said slowly, "enemy combatant, dying. I couldn't save him, but I stayed with him, held his hand, made sure he didn't die alone." How did that make you feel? Like I'd done something that mattered, not because of who he was or who I was, but because nobody should die alone. Nobody. Dr. Kim leaned forward. "David, have you ever considered nursing?" David laughed. "Nursing? That's not… I'm not… You were a combat lifesaver. You've dealt with trauma, with death, with people at their most vulnerable, and you just told me that the most meaningful thing you've ever done was making sure someone didn't die alone. That's nursing, David. That's exactly what nursing is." David went home that night and thought about it. Nursing. It had never occurred to him. Nurses were… well, he didn't really know what nurses were. He'd seen them in the VA hospital. Quiet, competent, always busy. Could he do that? He was 32 years old, starting over. Again. But maybe Dr. Kim was right. And maybe this was his new mission. David enrolled in community college, took prerequisites, anatomy, physiology, chemistry. He was older than most of his classmates by a decade, but he worked harder than anyone, got straight A's, applied to nursing school, got accepted. Nursing school was brutal, 2 years of intense studying, clinicals, exams, learning medications, procedures, assessments. But David thrived. Because for the first time since leaving the Marines, he had purpose again. During his clinical rotations, David gravitated toward the patients nobody else wanted, the difficult ones, the dying ones, the ones without family. Other students would request transfers away from these patients. Too depressing, too hard, too much death. David requested more. His instructors noticed. One of them, a veteran nurse named Patricia, and pulled him aside. "Why do you always volunteer for the end-of-life patients?" David told her about Ramadi, about the man whose hand he'd held, about the promise he'd made to himself in that moment. I decided that day that if I ever had the chance, I'd make sure nobody dies alone. Not on my watch. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. David, the world needs more nurses like you. He graduated top of his class, passed his licensing exam on the first try. And at 36 years old, David Torres became a registered nurse. He got a job at St. Catherine's Hospital, a large urban hospital, 800 beds, busy, chaotic. He requested the night shift, on the medical surgical floor, where the sickest patients were, where death was common. His manager, Linda, asked him why. Most new nurses want day shift. Easier hours, more support. David shook his head. Night shift is when people die, when family goes home, when patients are alone and scared. That's where I need to be. Linda hired him on the spot. David's first night on the floor, he got his assignment. 6 patients, 2 were stable, 3 needed frequent monitoring, and 1 was actively dying. Room 412, a woman named Dorothy, 78, end-stage heart failure. The day shift nurse gave report. Dorothy's family was here earlier. They said their goodbyes. They were exhausted. I told them to go home, get some rest. She probably has 12 to 24 hours left. David nodded, took the report, did his rounds, checked on his stable patients, administered medications, monitored vitals, but every 20 minutes he went back to room 412. Dorothy was sleeping. Breathing was labored, and oxygen at maximum. Morphine running to keep her comfortable. At 2 in the morning, David went in again. Dorothy's eyes were open. "Hi, Dorothy," David said softly. "I'm David. I'm your nurse tonight. How are you feeling?" "Scared," Dorothy whispered. Her voice was barely audible. David pulled up a chair, sat beside her bed. "What are you scared of?" "Dying. Alone. My kids, they were here, but they left. I don't want to die alone." David took her hand. "You won't, I promise. I'm going to stay right here with you, for as long as you need me." "You don't have to do that. You have other patients. They're stable, and even if they weren't, this is where I need to be right now, with you." Dorothy started crying, quietly. David held her hand. Let her cry. Didn't try to fix it, just witnessed it. They sat like that for 3 hours, and David talked to her, asked about her life, her children, her grandchildren. Dorothy told him stories about her husband who died 10 years ago, about her career as a teacher, about her garden, about the things she'd loved, about the things she regretted. And at 5:37 in the morning, Dorothy squeezed David's hand one last time. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," David said. "It was an honor." Dorothy closed her eyes, her breathing slowed, and at 5:42, she was gone. David sat with her for another 10 minutes, held her hand even though she was gone. Then he called the doctor, pronounced her, called her family, prepared her body. When his shift ended at 7, David went home, sat in his car, and cried, not from sadness, from gratitude, because he'd just experienced the most sacred thing he'd ever been part of, and he knew this was his calling. Over the next 12 years, David made it his mission, his promise. No one dies alone, not on his watch. If he had a patient who was actively dying, he stayed, even if it meant staying past his shift, even if it meant coming in on his day off, even if it meant sitting for hours. He stayed. His co-workers thought he was crazy at first. "David, you can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save them. I'm trying to be with them." "But it's so depressing. How do you handle it?" Because everyone deserves someone to hold their hand. Everyone deserves to be seen, to be heard, to matter. Even at the very end, especially at the very end. Word spread through the hospital, and the nurses started calling him when they had a patient who was dying alone. David, room 523, no family, end of life. Can you come? David would go, no matter what time, no matter how busy he was. He'd go, he'd sit, he'd hold their hand, he'd talk to them, listen to them, bear witness to their final moments. Sometimes the patients were conscious. They'd talk, share stories, express fears, say things they'd never told anyone. David listened to all of it. Sometimes the patients were unconscious. David would still talk to them, tell them about his day, about the weather, about stupid hospital gossip, anything to fill the silence. Because even if they couldn't respond, he believed they could hear, that they knew they weren't alone. He'd held the hands of veterans, of homeless people, of prisoners, of drug addicts, of CEOs, of teachers, and of criminals, of saints. He didn't judge, didn't discriminate, didn't ask questions about their past. Because in that moment, none of it mattered. They were human beings, dying, scared, and David was there. One night, David was called to room 308. Male patient, 62. End-stage liver failure, history of alcoholism, estranged from family. The charge nurse, Michelle, gave him the details. His name is Robert, homeless, was brought in from a shelter 3 weeks ago. No visitors, no family contact. He's got maybe a few hours left. I know you're busy, but I'll go, David said. Robert was unconscious when David arrived. Jaundiced, swollen. The smell of liver failure was unmistakable. David pulled up his chair, took Robert's hand. Hey, Robert, my name is David. I'm a nurse here, and I'm going to sit with you for a while. You're not alone. For 2 hours, David sat there, talking to Robert about nothing, about everything. Then, at around 3 in the morning, Robert's eyes opened. He looked at David, confused. Who are you? I'm David. I'm your nurse. Why are you holding my hand? Am I dying? David didn't lie. He never lied. Yes, Robert, you are. I'm sorry. Robert's eyes filled with tears. I didn't think anyone would be here. I thought I'd die alone, like I lived. You're not alone. I'm here. You don't even know me. I don't need to know you. I just need to be here, with you, because you matter, Robert. Your life mattered. Robert cried. Deep, shaking sobs. David held his hand tighter. Let him cry. After a few minutes, Robert calmed down. Can I tell you something? Robert asked. Anything. I was a terrible person. I hurt people, my wife, my kids. I drank, I yelled, I left. They're better off without me. That's why they're not here. David squeezed his hand. Robert, I can't speak to your past. I don't know what you did or didn't do, but I know this. Everyone deserves compassion. Everyone deserves forgiveness, especially from themselves. Whatever you did, whatever you regret, you can let it go now. You can be at peace. How? How do I let it go? By accepting that you were human, flawed, broken, like all of us, and by knowing that in this moment, right now, you are not alone. You are seen. You are heard. You matter. Robert looked at David, really looked at him. Why do you do this? David thought about Ramadi, about the dying insurgent, about Dorothy, about all the others. Because someone did it for me once, in a different way, and it changed my life. So I do it for others. It's my purpose. Robert smiled, small, weak, but real. Thank you. You're welcome, Robert. Robert closed his eyes, squeezed David's hand, and 15 minutes later, he was gone. David sat with him for a while longer. Then he called the morgue, prepared the body, and went back to his other patients. Just another night. Just another death. Just another promise kept. The stories spread. Patients' families heard about David, the nurse who stayed, who held hands, who made sure their loved ones weren't alone. They started requesting him. "Is David working tonight? Can he be our nurse?" David's manager, Linda, called him into her office one day. "David, I need to talk to you about something." David sat down, worried. Was he in trouble? Had he stayed too long with a patient? Neglected his other duties? You've been here 10 years now," Linda said. "Yes, Mom. And in that time, you've been written up exactly 0 times. You've received 37 commendations from families, 42 from fellow staff. You've been nominated for the hospital's Compassionate Care Award 5 times, and you've won it 3 times. David didn't know what to say. "I'm just doing my job." "No, David, you're doing something extraordinary. I've been a nurse for 33 years. I've never seen anyone do what you do. Sit with dying patients for hours, stay past your shift, come in on your days off, hold hands with people you don't know. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" David shrugged. "It doesn't feel rare. It feels necessary." Linda smiled. "That's exactly why you're extraordinary, because to you, it's not extraordinary. It's just what should be done." "David, I want to ask you something. Would you be willing to train other nurses, to teach them how to do what you do, how to be present with dying patients? I don't know if it can be taught. Maybe not the calling, but the skills, the approach, the compassion. I think you could help our staff be better, especially the young nurses. They're so scared of death. They avoid those patients. But if they saw you, learned from you, maybe they'd understand that being with someone when they die is a privilege, not a burden." David thought about it. "Okay, I'll try." Linda set up a training program. Once a month, David would lead a workshop. End-of-life care, the art of presence. The first session had 12 nurses. David told them about Ramadi, about Dorothy, about Robert, about the 1,000+ deaths he'd witnessed, about what he'd learned. "Death is going to happen," David said. "We can't stop it, but we can change how it happens. We can make it less scary, less lonely, less painful, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually." "How?" a young nurse asked. "By being present, by sitting, by holding hands, by listening, by bearing witness. You don't need special training. You don't need perfect words. You just need to show up, to stay, to care." "But what if I say the wrong thing?" David shook his head. "There's no wrong thing, as long as it's honest, as long as it's kind. People who are dying don't need perfect. They need real. They need human." Another nurse raised her hand. "David, how do you not burn out? How do you witness death over and over without it destroying you?" David paused. "Oh, it was a good question. The question everyone asked. I won't lie, it's hard. Some nights I go home and cry. Some nights I can't sleep. Some nights I wonder if I can keep doing this. But then I remember why I started. I remember that man in Ramadi. I remember Dorothy. I remember every single person whose hand I've held. And I remember that for them, in that moment, I was their whole world. I was the thing standing between them and absolute loneliness. How can I not show up for that?" The room was silent. "Also," David added, "I have a therapist. I highly recommend it. You can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself too. Therapy, exercise, hobbies, whatever refills you. Do that, because this work will empty you if you're not careful." The training became popular. More nurses signed up. David's workshops expanded. Yeah, he started speaking at nursing conferences, at medical schools, at hospice organizations. His message was simple. Everyone deserves to die with dignity, with compassion, with someone holding their hand, and it doesn't have to be a family member. It can be us. It should be us. News outlets heard about him. Local news did a segment. The nurse who never lets patients die alone. It went viral. National news picked it up. CBS, NBC. The Today Show wanted to interview him. David said no to most of them. He didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to do his job. But his manager convinced him, "David, think about the impact. If millions of people see what you do, maybe they'll demand better end-of-life care. Maybe they'll understand that dying doesn't have to be terrifying. That's worth being uncomfortable for a few interviews." So David agreed. And he did the Today Show, sat across from the host, trying not to look terrified. "David, you've sat with over 1,000 dying patients. Why do you do it?" the host asked. David looked into the camera. "Because I've seen war. I've seen death. I've seen what happens when people die alone and scared. And I made a promise to myself, to God, to whoever's listening, that if I ever had the power to change that, I would. Nursing gave me that power, so I use it every single time." What would you say to other healthcare workers watching this? David thought for a moment. "I'd say this. You chose healthcare because you wanted to help people, to heal them, to save them. But sometimes we can't save them. Sometimes all we can do is be with them. And that's enough. That's more than enough. But that's everything." The interview was shared millions of times. David's hospital was flooded with letters from nurses, from doctors, from families who'd lost loved ones. "Thank you for showing us what compassion looks like. My mother died alone in a hospital. I wish she'd had a nurse like you. You inspired me to become a nurse. I'm a doctor, and I've been avoiding dying patients for years. After seeing your interview, I realized I was wrong. I'm changing." David read every letter, cried over most of them, and kept showing up for his shifts. Year 11. David was 47 now, still working night shift, still sitting with dying patients, still keeping his promise. One night, he was called to room 287. The charge nurse, Amanda, briefed him. "Patient's name is Michael, 34 years old, end-stage pancreatic cancer. Wife and kids were here all day. They just left about an hour ago, completely exhausted. Michael is alert, in pain, scared, and he specifically asked if you were working tonight." David's heart clenched. 34, so young. "I'll go now." Michael was awake when David entered, thin, pale, eyes sunken, but alert. "Are you David?" Michael asked. "I am. You asked for me?" "The nurses told me about you, the guy who stays, who holds hands. I need that. I'm terrified." David pulled up his chair, sat down, took Michael's hand. "Tell me what you're afraid of." "Leaving my wife, my kids. They're 6 and 8. They need me. I'm not ready. I don't want to go." David squeezed his hand. "I can't imagine how hard this is. What you're feeling. How do I do this? How do I let go?" David took a breath. "Michael, can I tell you what I've learned from sitting with over 1,000 people as they died?" Michael nodded. "What matters at the end isn't how long you lived, it's how you loved. You have a wife who sat by your bedside all day, kids who adore you. That's not going away. That love doesn't end. It continues. In them, through them, forever. But I won't see them grow up. No, you won't. And that's unfair and terrible, and I'm so sorry. But Michael, you've given them something precious. You've shown them what it means to be loved unconditionally. what it means to fight, what it means to be brave, even when you're scared. They will carry that forever. Michael was crying. I don't feel brave. I feel like a coward. I'm leaving them. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and facing it anyway. You're facing death right now, with your eyes open, thinking about your family, worrying about them. That's not cowardice. That's love. They talked for hours about Michael's life, his childhood, meeting his wife, his kids' births, his dreams, his regrets. David listened to all of it, held his hand through all of it. At 6 a.m, Michael's breathing changed, slowed. David knew the signs. Michael, your family, do you want me to call them? Michael shook his head, weakly. Let them sleep. They need rest. Just stay, please. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. Michael smiled. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring about a stranger. You're not a stranger, Michael. Not anymore. At 6:23, Michael took his last breath. David sat with him until the family arrived at 8. When Michael's wife saw David sitting there, holding her husband's hand, she broke down. You stayed. I promised him I would. She hugged David, sobbed into his shoulder. Thank you. Thank you for not letting him die alone. Thank you for being there when I couldn't. David held her, let her cry. He talked about you, about the kids, about how much he loved you. His last thoughts were of you. He was at peace. She pulled back, looked at David through tears. How do you do this? How many times? This was 1047. She stared at him. 1000. I keep count, because every single one matters. Every single person deserves to be remembered. Michael was 1047, and I will never forget him. That story made the news too. Michael's wife did an interview, talked about David. It's about the nurse who'd sat with her husband for 8 hours, who'd held his hand, who'd made his death less terrifying. The hospital was overwhelmed with requests. Can David be our nurse? But David couldn't be everywhere, couldn't sit with every dying patient in the hospital. There weren't enough hours in the day. So he trained more nurses, started a program called the Presence Project, teaching healthcare workers how to sit with death, how to be comfortable with dying patients, how to hold space for grief and fear and peace. The program expanded beyond St. Catherine's. Other hospitals adopted it. Nursing schools added it to their curriculum. David's message spread. Within 2 years, over 5,000 healthcare workers had been trained. The impact was measurable. Yes, patient satisfaction scores in end-of-life care went up by 63% in hospitals that implemented the program. Families reported feeling more supported, less traumatized by their loved one's death. Nurses reported feeling more confident, less afraid of dying patients. But for David, it wasn't about the numbers. It was about the individual moments, the individual hands he held, the individual promises he kept. One night, David was sitting with a woman named Patricia, 91 years old, dementia, end of life. Her daughter had been there earlier, but had to leave to check on her own children. David sat with Patricia. She was in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes confused, sometimes calm, sometimes agitated. David held her hand through all of it. At one point, Patricia woke up, looked at David. James, is that you? David knew James was her late husband, dead for 20 years. No, Mom. My name is David. I'm your nurse. Patricia's face fell. Oh, I thought James came back. David made a decision. Patricia, what would you want to say to James if he were here? Her eyes brightened. I'd tell him I miss him, that I've been waiting that I'm ready to see him again. I think he knows, and I think he's waiting for you too. Do you really think so? David squeezed her hand. I do. I've sat with a lot of people at the end, and every single one talks about the people they've lost, the people they love. I think they're waiting, on the other side, ready to welcome us home. Patricia smiled. Peaceful. That's nice. That's really nice. She closed her eyes, never opened them again. Died 30 minutes later. David sat with her and thought about all the people he'd sat with, all the hands he'd held, all the fears he'd witnessed, all the peace he'd helped create. He thought about that insurgent in Ramadi, the man who'd started all of this. David had thought about him often over the years, wondered who he was, if he had a family, if anyone mourned him, if anyone remembered him. David remembered. He'd never forget. Year 12. David got called into Linda's office again. She was retiring. 25 years at St. Catherine's. She wanted to tell David personally. I'm leaving the hospital in good hands, Linda said, especially yours. David, in my quarter century here, I've seen a lot of nurses, good ones, great ones, but I've never seen anyone like you. You've changed the culture of this entire hospital. You've changed how we think about death, how we treat dying patients, how we support their families. That's a legacy. David felt emotion rise in his throat. I learned from the best. You gave me the freedom to do this work. You supported me when other managers might have told me I was wasting time. Thank you. Linda handed him an envelope. Open it later, after I leave. They hugged. Linda left. David opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a check. The letter read, David, you once told me that you keep count, that you're currently at 1,089 patients whose hands you've held as they died. I've kept count too. In the 12 years you've been here, you've worked 3,120 night shifts. You've stayed late 847 times. You've come in on your day off 203 times. You've donated over 4,000 hours of unpaid time to sit with dying patients. The hospital can't pay you for those hours, and policy won't allow it. But I can. This check is from my personal account. It's not much, but it's a small thank you for everything you've given, for everyone you've helped, for the nurse you are. The hospital board also wanted me to give you this. Effective immediately, you're being promoted to clinical nurse specialist in palliative care. Your new role is to do exactly what you've been doing, but hospital-wide, and to train others to do the same. You'll have a team, resources, support. This is your legacy, David. Make it count. With admiration and gratitude, Linda. The check was for $50,000. David stared at it. At the letter, he sat down at his desk, and for the first time in 12 years, he cried at work. Not from sadness, from gratitude, from validation, from knowing that his promise, his mission, mattered. And David took the new position, built a team of 12 nurses, all trained in the Presence Project, all committed to the mission. No one dies alone. They created a system, a pager system. Any nurse, anywhere in the hospital, could page the palliative presence team if they had a dying patient without family. Within minutes, someone would respond, would go to that room, would sit, would hold hands, would bear witness. In the first year, the team sat with 347 patients. In the second year, 612. Word spread beyond St. Catherine's. Other hospitals wanted to implement the program. David and his team became consultants, traveling to hospitals across the country, training staff, setting up systems, spreading the mission. Over 5 years, the program was adopted by 127 hospitals in 34 states. Thousands of patients died with someone holding their hand, and someone who cared, someone who stayed. David kept working the floor too. He couldn't give it up, couldn't stop sitting with patients himself. It was too important, too sacred. One night, David was paged to room 519. The nurse's voice was shaky. "David, we have a situation. Patient is dying. No family, but he's asking for you, by name." David frowned. Did he say why? No, he just keeps saying, "David Torres. I need David Torres." David rushed to room 519. The patient was in his 60s, Middle Eastern descent, thin, dying. David didn't recognize him. "I'm David Torres. You asked for me?" The man's eyes opened, focused on David. "You don't remember me?" "I'm sorry, have we met?" The man smiled weakly. "No, but you saved my brother's life 23 years ago, in Iraq." David's blood went cold. What? "My brother was killed in Ramadi, 2004. He was fighting. American soldiers found him. Most of them left, but one stayed. A young Marine. Held my brother's hand as he died. Made sure he wasn't alone. That Marine was you." David couldn't breathe. How do you know?" "My brother spoke before he died. The soldiers didn't know he spoke English, but he did. He told the Marine thank you, and the Marine told him his name. David Torres. We never forgot." The man reached out his hand. David took it, tears streaming down his face. "My brother's name was Ahmed, and because of you, he didn't die alone. He died with compassion, with dignity, with someone who cared, even though you were enemies." The man squeezed David's hand. "I have no family here. I came to America 10 years ago. I am alone. When I heard about you, about the nurse who sits with dying patients, I knew it was you. I knew it was the Marine who saved my brother, and I wanted to thank you. Before I die." David was sobbing. "I think about him all the time. Your brother. I never knew his name, but I've thought about him every single day for 23 years. He's the reason I became a nurse, the reason I do this. I wanted to honor him, to honor that moment." Ahmed smiled. "You have honored him 1,000 times over. He would be so proud." They sat together. David and Ahmed, former enemies, now brothers, bound by compassion, by witness, by love. Ahmed died 4 hours later, David holding his hand, just like he'd held Ahmed's brother's hand 2 decades before. When David left that room, he sat in the hallway, put his head in his hands, and understood something profound. And every person he'd sat with, every hand he'd held, every death he'd witnessed, it had all led to this moment, to closing a circle that began in a war zone, to understanding that compassion has no borders, no enemies, no limits, just humanity, recognizing humanity, and choosing to stay. The story of David and Ahmed went viral. International news. The Marine who became a nurse, who'd held an enemy's hand in war, and then held that enemy's brother's hand in peace. People around the world were moved, inspired, changed. Donations poured into the Presence Project, millions of dollars, enough to expand the program globally. Within 3 years, the program was in 14 countries, training healthcare workers everywhere, teaching them what David had learned in Ramadi, that everyone deserves compassion, that no one should die alone, that bearing witness to someone's death is sacred work. David was nominated for national awards, humanitarian awards, nursing awards. He won most of them. But he never let it change him. He still worked night shift, still sat with dying patients, still held hands, still kept his promise. Now, at 52, David had sat with over 2,000 dying patients, 2,000 hands held, 2,000 promises kept. 2,000 people who didn't die alone. Reporters asked him constantly, "How do you keep doing this? Doesn't it destroy you?" David's answer was always the same. "It doesn't destroy me. It makes me. Every person I sit with teaches me something about life, about love, about what matters. They give me more than I give them. They remind me that life is precious, that connection is everything. That love is the only thing that survives death. How could I not do this?" One of the reporters followed up. "What's the most important thing you've learned?" David thought for a long moment. That dying isn't the enemy. Loneliness is, fear is, feeling forgotten is. But if we can remove those things, if we can sit with someone and let them know they matter, that they're seen, that they're not alone, then death loses its power. It's still sad, it still hurts, but it's not terrifying. It's just a transition from here to whatever comes next. And if we do it right, it can be peaceful, even beautiful. Beautiful? Yes, I've seen it. 2,000 times. I've seen people let go peacefully because they knew someone cared, because they weren't alone, because in their final moments, they experienced love. That's beautiful. David's daughter, Elena, is in nursing school now. She's 24, following in her father's footsteps. Not because he pushed her, but because she saw what he did, saw the impact, saw the meaning. She wants that too. David's son, Marcus, is a hospice chaplain, 27 years old. He sits with dying patients too, but he tends to their spiritual needs. Father and son, both doing the same work, both keeping the same promise. David's wife, Carmen, works as a grief counselor, helping families navigate loss. The whole family dedicated to death work, to making dying less scary, to supporting people in their darkest moments. People ask Carmen, "How do you handle being married to David, knowing he spends every shift with dying people?" Carmen always smiles. "I married the most compassionate man I've ever met. He comes home exhausted, sometimes sad, more sometimes shaken, but never empty, because he knows he's doing exactly what he's meant to do, and I'm proud of him every single day." David's team has grown. What started as 12 nurses is now a network of 300 healthcare workers across the globe, all trained, all committed, all holding hands, all bearing witness. The Presence Project has a waiting list of hospitals wanting to implement the program. Universities are studying its impact. Research shows that patients who die with a Presence team member experience less anxiety, less pain, more peace. Their families report less complicated grief, less trauma, better healing. It's measurable, quantifiable, scientifically proven. But David doesn't need the studies. He knows it works, because he's seen it 2,000 times. Last month, David got a call from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They wanted him to speak at a national conference about combat-related PTSD, about moral injury, about healing. David almost said no. He didn't consider himself healed. He still had nightmares about Iraq, still woke up sometimes thinking he was back in Ramadi, still struggled, but his therapist encouraged him. "David, you're one of the most healed trauma survivors I know, not because you don't have symptoms, but because you've turned your pain into purpose. That's healing. That's what people need to hear." So David agreed. He stood in front of 800 veterans, active duty, retired, wounded, whole, all carrying trauma, all looking for answers. "My name is David Torres," he began. "I'm a Marine Corps veteran, 3 deployments, Iraq and Afghanistan. I saw combat. I saw death. I saw things that still wake me up screaming 20 years later. I came home with PTSD. I struggled. I didn't know who I was without the uniform, without the mission, without the purpose." He paused, looked at the faces staring back at him. "But I want to tell you about something that happened in Ramadi, something that changed my life, something that gave me a new mission." He told them about Ahmed, about holding his hand, about the promise he made, about becoming a nurse, about sitting with 2,000 dying patients, about finding purpose in pain. "I still have PTSD," David said. "I still struggle, but I have a reason to get up every day, a mission, a promise to keep. And that makes all the difference." He looked around the room. "So, if you're struggling, if you feel lost, if you don't know who you are without the military, I want you to hear this. Your mission isn't over. It's just different now. You learn to serve, to sacrifice, to protect. Those skills don't disappear when you take off the uniform. You can still serve, still protect, still make a difference. You just have to find your new battlefield. For me, it's hospital rooms. For you, it might be something else. Coaching, teaching, counseling, building, creating, helping. But whatever it is, know this. You matter. Your service mattered. And your life still has purpose. You just have to find it." The applause was deafening. After the speech, David was mobbed. Veterans wanting to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him their stories, to ask for advice. David stayed for 3 hours, talked to everyone who wanted to talk, listened to every story, held space for every person. And because that's what he does, that's who he is. Tonight, David is working night shift. Like always, it's 11 p.m. He's doing his rounds, checking on his 6 patients. 5 are stable, 1 is dying. Room 412. Same room where he'd sat with Dorothy 12 years ago. Full circle. The patient's name is Grace, 76. End-stage COPD. Family was here earlier. They left to sleep. Grace asked if David was working. The day shift nurse told her yes. Grace smiled. "Good. I heard about him. The one who stays. I want him with me." David enters the room. Grace is awake, oxygen mask on, breathing labored, scared. "Hi, Grace. I'm David. I know who you are. Will you sit with me?" "Of course, for as long as you need." David pulls up his chair, takes her hand. "What would you like to talk about?" Grace tells him about her life, her husband, her children, her garden, her regrets, her joys, her fears. David listens to all of it, holds her hand through all of it, bears witness to all of it. At 3 a.m, Grace's breathing changes. David knows the signs. "Grace, are you ready?" "I don't know, I'm scared." "That's okay. Being scared is okay, but you're not alone. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" "I promise." Grace squeezes his hand, closes her eyes, and at 3:17, she takes her last breath. David sits with her for 10 more minutes, holding her hand, honoring her, remembering her. Then he stands, calls the doctor, prepares her body, calls her family, fills out the paperwork, and adds one more mark to his count. 2017. 2017 people who didn't die alone. 2017 promises kept. And 2017 lives witnessed. 2017 hands held. David walks to the break room, pours a cup of coffee, sits down, exhausted, sad, grateful. A young nurse, fresh out of school, sits down next to him. "David, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How do you do it? How do you sit with dying people over and over? Doesn't it break your heart?" David smiles, tired, but real. "Every single time. But hearts are meant to break. That's how the light gets in, And if my heartbreaking means someone doesn't die alone, that's a trade I'll make, every time, for the rest of my life. The young nurse nods, thoughtful. I want to do what you do. Can you teach me? David looks at her, sees himself 20 years ago. Young, eager, searching for purpose. Yes, I can teach you. But first, let me tell you a story about a man I met in Iraq, a man whose hand I held as he died, a man who changed my life. His name was Ahmed. And that's where we'll end this story. The story of a Marine who became a nurse, who turned his trauma into purpose, who made a promise in a war zone and kept it 2,000 times, who proved that compassion knows no borders, that service doesn't end with the uniform, that everyone deserves to die with dignity, with peace, with someone holding their hand. If this story moved you, I need you to do something. Hit that like button. Not for me, for David, for every healthcare worker who sits with dying patients, for every person who's ever felt alone, for every life that matters, even at the very end. Subscribe to this channel, because I'm going to keep telling stories like this, stories that remind us what it means to be human, to care, to witness, to stay, and leave a comment. Tell me about someone who showed you compassion when you needed it most. Or tell me about a healthcare worker who made a difference in your life. Or just tell me where you're watching from. Because David's story is traveling the world, and I want to see how far love can reach. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Thank you for believing that one person can make a difference. Because David proves it. Every single night, 2017 times, and counting. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, hold someone's hand today. Listen to someone's story. Be present for someone who needs you. Because that's how we change the world. One hand at a time, one moment at a time, one promise kept at a time.